It all started one lazy afternoon when I was browsing through a small, quirky second-hand shop nestled between two cafes in the heart of town. The shop was a labyrinth of dust-covered books, antique furniture, and odd trinkets that seemed to belong in some forgotten era. My friend Alex was with me, as usual, always up for an adventure. We didn't have any particular plan that day, just exploring, taking in the strange charm of the place. It was the kind of store where you could lose track of time, your hands brushing over old vinyl records, the scent of aged paper and wood lingering in the air. I was sifting through a box of old board games, trying to find something that might spark nostalgia. That's when I saw it. A game tucked away in the far corner of the shelf, almost as if it were trying to hide itself. It wasn't like any game I'd seen before. No familiar brand, no recognizable cover art. The box was dark, with only cryptic, faded symbols etched into the sides. There was no title, just a simple note that read, "Only the chosen may finish." The paper it was printed on had an odd texture, almost like ancient parchment. "Hey, look at this," I called out to Alex, who was flipping through an old magazine in the corner. He came over and eyed the game skeptically, but his curiosity was already piqued. "Looks old," Alex said, his eyes scanning the worn edges of the box. "But it doesn't even have a name. It's like something out of a horror movie." I laughed, brushing off his remark, but there was something about it that sent a shiver down my spine. Maybe it was the lack of a title or the cryptic warning, but there was a sense of unease, as if the game was not meant to be found. Yet, the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to know what it was. Alex was always the one to push boundaries, to drag me into strange situations, and now it was my turn to be the instigator. The shopkeeper, an elderly man who seemed almost too frail to be running the place, caught sight of us looking at the game. He shuffled over, his slow steps echoing in the otherwise quiet room. He peered over his glasses and offered a toothless grin. "That one's special," he said, his voice cracked and thin, but oddly reassuring. "It's not for everyone, though. Only for those who are ready." I raised an eyebrow. "Ready for what?" The old man didn't answer directly. Instead, he placed his gnarled hands on the box, as if touching it were some sort of sacred act. "If you're meant to play, you will. But don't say I didn't warn you." Alex, ever the skeptic, laughed. "You can't be serious, man. It's just an old game. No big deal." But the old man didn't seem to take offense at Alex's casual dismissal. Instead, he simply nodded and shuffled away. Despite my growing hesitation, I was already mentally committed. The lure of something mysterious was too strong. I glanced at Alex, who shrugged and picked up the box with a wry grin. "All right, let's do it," he said, his voice laced with excitement and that familiar spark of challenge. We bought the game without a second thought. The shopkeeper didn't seem surprised, as if he had seen this all before. As we left the shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But, like Alex, I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just an old game. What harm could it really do? That evening, we gathered in my living room, the flickering lights casting a soft glow across the room. The game sat in front of us, innocently waiting. It didn't look like much, just a set of cards, a board, and a strange-looking die with symbols I couldn't quite make out. There were no instructions, no manual. All that was included was the cryptic note, "Only the chosen may finish." Alex was the first to break the silence. "All right, let's see what this is all about." He shuffled the cards, his fingers nimble and quick, clearly excited. I wasn't as eager as he was, but I felt that pull, a sense of curiosity urging me to play. We set up the board, unsure of how to begin, but instinctively, Alex seemed to know where the pieces went. He placed the die in the center and gave me a mischievous grin. "Ladies first," he said. I reluctantly rolled the die, watching as it spun across the board. It landed on a strange symbol, one I hadn't seen before. Before I could say anything, the ground beneath us trembled, faintly at first, then more noticeably. The lights flickered again, and I felt a chill run through the room. "What the hell?" I muttered, looking over at Alex, who seemed unfazed. He rolled next, and the board seemed to react. Each roll of the die brought more tension into the room, and with every move, the atmosphere became heavier. I couldn't explain it, but there was something about that game. It wasn't just a game. Felt real. As the evening wore on, the game seemed to take on a life of its own. The first few turns were uneventful, just a series of moves on the board, each one resulting in more cryptic actions and unusual consequences. But then, something happened that couldn't be explained away. Started small. At first, it was just a flicker, a quick dimming of the lights, as if someone had momentarily turned off the power. I brushed it off, thinking it was just an electrical glitch. Alex, on the other hand, didn't seem to notice. He was too absorbed in the game, almost as if the pieces and cards had some kind of magnetic hold on him. His eyes were glued to the board, his hand shaking slightly as he made his next move. I was starting to feel uncomfortable, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Maybe it was the tension in the air, or perhaps it was the strange sense that the room had become colder, despite the heater running in the background. I tried to focus on the game, but it wasn't as easy as it had been at the beginning. There was something off about the way the dice spun, the way the cards seemed to shift in Alex's hand before he even touched them. Then, during one of my turns, a loud bang echoed from the other room. My heart skipped a beat as I jumped out of my seat. Alex didn't even flinch. "What was that?" I asked, my voice strained with unease. Alex glanced at me, still focused on his turn. "Probably just the wind or something," he said nonchalantly. But I didn't think it was the wind. The house had been eerily quiet until that moment, and there was no draft, no storm outside to explain the noise. I walked cautiously toward the source of the sound, half expecting to find something broken or out of place. But when I opened the door to the hallway, everything was exactly as it should be. No signs of anything having fallen or been disturbed. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the feeling of growing dread. Maybe I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. But when I returned to the living room, I couldn't ignore the way Alex was acting. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and his movements were quicker, more erratic than usual. It was as if something had taken hold of him, something I couldn't see but could feel. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Alex didn't answer right away. His gaze was fixed on the board, his hand hovering over the next card, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. I stepped closer to him, trying to get his attention, but when he finally looked up, it wasn't the Alex I knew. His eyes were wide, his pupils dilated. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, and for a moment, I thought I saw something dark moving behind his pupils. A shadow, a flicker of something not quite human. "Alex, what's wrong?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He blinked a few times, then shook his head as if coming out of a trance. I don't know. I saw something." His voice was unsteady, as though he was trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. "When I rolled the die, it didn't land like it was supposed to. It changed mid-roll and then..." He trailed off, his eyes scanning the room as if expecting something to appear. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't just some coincidence anymore. The game, the lights, the strange occurrences. It all felt connected. But how? And why was Alex so affected by it? "Maybe we should stop playing," I suggested, though I didn't believe it myself. The idea of leaving the game unfinished, of walking away from something that felt so alive, felt impossible. But Alex didn't seem to hear me. He was already reaching for another card, his hands moving with a strange urgency. His obsession with the game was starting to become unsettling, like he couldn't, or wouldn't, stop. I grabbed his wrist, pulling his hand away from the deck. "Alex, this isn't normal. You're freaking me out." For a moment, he just stared at me blankly, as if he hadn't heard a word I said. Then, finally, he spoke in a voice that sounded far too distant, as if he were speaking through a fog. "We have to finish it. We have to see it through." A shiver ran down my spine. The way he said it, the way he looked at me, it was like he was no longer the Alex I knew. This wasn't about a game anymore. It was about something else, something darker. Something was drawing him in, and I was afraid of what it might be. I stood frozen for a moment, watching him. The air in the room seemed to thicken, the shadows deepening as if they were pressing closer. The walls felt like they were closing in on us, and the ground beneath me trembled ever so slightly. The game wasn't just changing Alex, it was changing everything. And if we didn't stop now, I feared there might be no turning back. But then, just as I was about to say something, the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't come back on. The room was plunged into darkness, and in the silence that followed, I heard it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere beyond the walls. Play. The voice was soft, almost like a lullaby, but there was something wrong about it, something that made my blood run cold. I knew then that this game wasn't just a game. It was something much older, much more dangerous, and we were already in way too deep. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever. The lights were still out, and the only illumination in the room came from the faint glow of the game board. I could barely make out the shapes of the cards and pieces in the eerie, dim light. It was as though the game itself was casting some sort of unnatural glow, pulling us deeper into its grip. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the sweat forming on the back of my neck. "Alex, we need to stop this," I said, my voice shaking as I grabbed his arm. He was still hunched over the board, his eyes locked onto the pieces as if he couldn't hear me. He shook his head slowly, almost imperceptibly, and his lips curled into a strange, hollow smile. "We can't stop now," he whispered, almost in a trance. "It's too late." I wanted to argue, but there was something about his tone, something about the way he looked at the board, that made me hesitate. The voice in the dark, the flickering lights, the strange coldness in the room. They weren't just coincidental. They were part of the game. The game, I realized, wasn't just a series of moves. It was an experience, an evolving force that seemed to shape the reality around us. And now, the rules were starting to reveal themselves. Or maybe they had always been there, waiting for us to figure them out. As I glanced at the game board, I noticed something I hadn't before. Symbols had appeared around the edges of the cards and on the spaces of the board. Symbols that hadn't been there when we first set it up. They looked ancient, almost like runes, and they glowed faintly in the dark. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath, leaning closer to get a better look. Alex's hand moved again, this time more deliberately, as though he knew exactly what to do. He placed a card down on the board, and the air around us seemed to shift. The temperature dropped even further, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally. "The rules are changing," Alex said, his voice flat, as though he were reciting something he had read, something he had no control over. "Each move, each decision, it takes us further." "What do you mean, further?" I asked, my voice thick with anxiety. "Further where?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at the board, his eyes wide and unfocused, like he was seeing something beyond it. His fingers trembled as he picked up another card, the symbols on it dancing in the dim light. I felt a deep sense of dread wash over me. This was no ordinary game. The rules weren't just in the game itself, they were in the air, in the walls, in everything around us. Suddenly, the room felt alive, as though it were reacting to the game, as if the house itself was part of it. The walls creaked, and the floor groaned beneath our feet. I could feel a strange vibration in the air, as if something was being pulled into our reality. Something ancient, something powerful. Alex leaned closer to the board, his face inches from the game pieces. "You have to be careful with the choices you make," he said quietly. "One wrong move, and you might not come back." I wanted to yell at him, to tell him to stop, to make him realize how dangerous this was. But as soon as I opened my mouth, a sharp pain shot through my head, as if something were trying to push its way into my thoughts. I winced, clutching my temples, and for a brief moment, the room went completely silent. When the pain subsided, I looked around the room, and everything felt wrong. The shadows had deepened, the walls seemed to pulse, and the air felt thick, almost suffocating. It was as if the game had opened a rift in the space around us, a rift that was slowly, inexorably drawing us in. "Alex," I said again, this time with more urgency. "We need to stop playing. This isn't right." But he didn't respond. He was staring at the board, completely absorbed in the game. It was as if he couldn't hear me anymore. His movements had become automatic, mechanical, as if he were being guided by something or someone else. And then I saw it. The card he had placed down earlier had begun to glow brighter, and as it did, the symbols on the board shifted again. The runes weren't just symbols, they were instructions. The game was showing us the next step, guiding us through a maze of rules that were too complex, too strange to understand. There were no words, just symbols, and they felt alive, like they were pulling us deeper into something dark. The next card Alex drew had a strange inscription on it, one I couldn't understand. It glowed with an unnatural light, and as he placed it down, the air seemed to crackle with energy. The board reacted in ways I couldn't explain. Pieces moved on their own, the die spun by itself, and the runes on the edges of the cards began to pulse, growing brighter with every passing second. "It's the next step," Alex whispered, as if in a trance. "The game is showing us the way. We can't stop now." I wanted to scream, to shake him awake, but something held me back. Something in me knew that this wasn't just a game anymore. The rules weren't just written on the cards, they were written in the very fabric of reality itself. And then the last rule revealed itself. The game was no longer something we controlled. It was something controlling us. It was at that moment, the moment when the game seemed to have completely absorbed Alex, that I realized the danger we were in. The air was thick with tension, and I could feel the oppressive weight of something ancient and powerful pressing down on us. I wanted to run, to throw the game out the window and forget it ever existed. But Alex, he was lost. His eyes were glazed over, his movements mechanical. He was no longer the friend I knew. I took a step back from the board, breathing shallowly, trying to think. My mind raced, but every thought was clouded by a sense of dread. The walls seemed to be closing in, and the shadows in the corners of the room twisted unnaturally, moving like living things. In that moment of panic, I remembered something, the warnings. I had seen odd things online about games like this. Games that weren't just games. There had been whispers, cryptic posts on forums, strange encounters recounted by people who claimed to have played games like the one we had found. Some said the games were cursed, others spoke of a hidden ritual woven into the gameplay. And there were those who claimed that once you started playing, there was no way to stop. They described bizarre occurrences, objects moving on their own, voices whispering from the walls, shadows that seemed to have a mind of their own. But I had brushed them off as stories, as delusions, people's imaginations running wild. I hadn't taken them seriously. Now, standing in the thickening darkness of my living room, I understood why they had warned others. I was in the same position as those who had gone before us. The game was no longer a simple pastime. It had become a portal, a doorway to something else. Something that was not content with just our attention. It wanted us. I quickly grabbed my phone and frantically searched through old forum posts, hoping to find something, anything, that could help. My fingers trembled as I scrolled, desperate to find an explanation. And then I found it. A thread titled, "The Game That Takes You." My pulse quickened as I opened it, reading through the responses. The first post was from a user named Lost Soul 88. I don't know how I'm still here to write this, but if you find this game, destroy it. Don't play it. Don't even think about it. I wish I had known this sooner. The message sent chills down my spine. The game knows you. It watches you, picks its players carefully. Some of us have tried to leave, tried to stop playing, but it doesn't let you. It's not a game anymore. It's a doorway, a ritual. If you play long enough, it'll take you somewhere. Somewhere you can never return from. The rest of the thread was filled with similar accounts, each more desperate than the last. People who had vanished, others who had seen strange things while playing, but all of them shared one common theme. Once you played, once you accepted the game's invitation, there was no going back. Some even claimed to have seen other players, their faces twisted and contorted, as though something had taken them but left their bodies behind. I felt my stomach turn. This was real. The game wasn't just some innocent pastime, it was a ritual, a trap. It was meant to pull you in and never let go. My phone buzzed suddenly, pulling me out of my thoughts. A message popped up from an unknown number. Don't let him reach the end. I froze, staring at the words, feeling a cold sweat break out on my forehead. My eyes darted over to Alex, who was still sitting hunched over the board, his hand moving with frantic energy. He hadn't noticed the message. He hadn't noticed anything except the game. I quickly typed out a response, asking who had sent the message, but there was no reply. The message remained, like a chilling omen hanging over me. The doorbell rang. I jumped, startled by the sudden sound, and for a moment, I hesitated. Who could be here at this hour? I glanced at Alex, still immersed in the game, unaware of the world around him. Something wasn't right. I walked cautiously to the door, trying to steady my breath. I had to know what was going on. But when I opened it, no one was there. Just a chill wind that swept in, carrying with it the faintest whisper. Play the game, or you'll never see him again. I slammed the door shut, my heart racing. Was this part of the game too? Or was it something else? Something trying to warn me, to stop me from making a terrible mistake? I rushed back to the living room, my mind reeling. The room felt colder than ever, and I could hear a low hum, like static, coming from the game board. The cards, the pieces, everything seemed to be vibrating slightly. Alex's face was pale, his lips moving as though he were muttering something to himself. I had to get him out of this. But how? How could I pull him away from something that seemed to have such a tight hold on him? That's when I noticed it. The strange symbol that had appeared on the card he had just placed down. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't a rune or a shape I recognized. It looked like an eye. A single, unblinking eye. The eye stared back at me, and for a moment, it felt as if it were watching me, studying me. The room seemed to pulse with an energy that I couldn't understand, and I realized that the game wasn't just affecting Alex. It was reaching out to me too. It was trying to pull us both in, to consume us, to drag us deeper into whatever dark world it had opened. And then, the warning flashed in my mind again. The message from the unknown number. Don't let him reach the end. I had to act. If I didn't, Alex might disappear just like the others. But was it already too late? I stood frozen, my mind racing as I stared at the board. The eye on the card seemed to pulse with life, staring directly at me, as if it knew I was the one trying to stop this. The room had grown impossibly cold, and the air felt thick with an energy I couldn't comprehend. Every inch of me screamed to escape, to run as far as I could from this game, from whatever dark force it had unleashed. But my feet felt glued to the floor, and I could feel my body locking up, trapped in this nightmare. Alex had stopped moving. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was merely staring at the board, but then his eyes shifted slowly, slowly toward me. They weren't the eyes I knew. They were glassy and unfocused, and his pupils were dilated to the point where they almost looked black. His face was pale, the skin taut, as though something inside him was fighting to break free. "Alex?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Please, we need to stop. You don't know what you're doing." But his lips curled into that same hollow smile. "We have to finish it," he said, his voice eerily flat. "It's almost over." Almost over? What did he mean by that? The desperation in my chest grew, and the room seemed to close in around me as I realized that whatever was controlling Alex, whatever had taken hold of him, wasn't going to let go easily. This wasn't just a game anymore. It had become a possession. I backed away from the board, trying to find the strength to move, to break free from the invisible chains that held me in place. But as I moved toward the door, something shifted. The ground trembled underfoot, and the walls seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen force. The game wasn't just altering our reality, it was manipulating it. Every step I took, the space around me seemed to warp, and I found myself back in front of the board as though I had never moved at all. This was no longer just a physical place. It was part of something much larger, something beyond the limits of time and space. The room had become a part of the game, a playing field, and I realized with a sickening certainty that the game had its own rules now. We were merely players caught in a web we couldn't escape. I turned to Alex, who was still staring blankly ahead, his hand frozen above the board. The pieces had stopped moving, and the air around us was thick with an oppressive silence. It was as if the game had taken a momentary break, allowing us a brief respite. But I knew it was only a pause before the next move, and that next move could be the one that finished us. I grabbed Alex's arm, shaking him violently. "Alex, snap out of it." His head jerked back, and for a moment, I thought I had gotten through to him. His eyes flickered, as though he were coming back to himself. But then, just as quickly, the light in his eyes dimmed again, and he looked down at the board with a strange sort of reverence. "It's too late," he whispered. "We've already started." The words sent a chill down my spine. Couldn't believe it. No matter what I did, no matter how I tried to pull him away, it was like something was binding him to the game. I could feel it too, this strange pull, this magnetic force that seemed to draw me back in. "Why did you do this?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't you listen when I said we shouldn't play?" Alex didn't answer. He just reached for another card, his movements stiff and unnatural. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, and for a moment, I thought he might drop it. But he didn't. Instead, he held it in his hand, staring at the symbol on the back of the card. I could see it now. This symbol was different from the others. It was more intricate, almost like a twisted version of a sigil, etched with jagged lines and shapes that seemed to pulse with dark energy. I could feel the pull of the symbol, like it was calling to me, beckoning me to understand it.
No, iwisparat.
"We have to get rid of it. This is how it ends." But Alex was already placing the card on the board. The moment it touched the surface, the room seemed to shift again. The walls bent inward, and the shadows in the corners of the room grew darker, deeper. I could hear faint whispers now, too faint to make out but unmistakable. They came from all directions, rising up like a chant, a low hum that seemed to come from the very air itself. The ground trembled beneath us once more, stronger this time. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance, and I reached out to grab onto something, anything, to steady myself. My fingers brushed against the board, and in that instant, I felt it. The game's energy surged through me, filling every fiber of my being with an unnatural chill. And then the whispers stopped. The room was completely silent. "Alex," I said, my voice breaking, "please, we need to stop this." But Alex didn't respond. He was no longer just staring at the board. His face was twisted in a way I had never seen before, his mouth opening wide, but no words came out. Instead, a low growl, almost animalistic, rumbled from deep within him. His body jerked violently as if something inside him were struggling to break free. The game had taken him. It had taken his mind, his soul, and now it was reaching for his body. I backed away slowly, my heart racing in my chest. What was happening? Was this the end? Before I could react, the lights flickered again, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The symbols on the cards had begun to glow, pulsing in time with the rhythm of the whispers. The game wasn't just controlling Alex, it was controlling everything. And that's when I saw it, the doorway. A dark rift, swirling in the air above the board. A hole in the fabric of reality itself. It was a doorway to something else. To another world. A world that was pulling us in. And if I didn't act fast, if I didn't find a way to close it, we would be swallowed whole. My heart slammed against my ribs as I looked up at the dark rift in the air. The doorway wasn't just a crack in the space around us. It was something far worse. It was an abyss, a swirling vortex of shadows that seemed to reach out, pulling the very air into it. The light in the room had dimmed to near nothingness, and the game pieces on the board were now floating weightlessly, as though gravity itself had lost all meaning. Alex's body trembled violently, and I could see the struggle in his face as if something was trying to claw its way out of him. His eyes were wild, darting back and forth, but his lips remained parted, silent. There was no more trace of the Alex I knew, The friend who had been sitting at this very table just hours ago, laughing and talking like nothing could go wrong. Now, all that remained was an empty vessel, filled with whatever dark force the game had unleashed. I could feel the pull of the portal, its invisible force tugging at me, urging me to step closer. It beckoned, promising answers, perhaps even freedom, but I knew it was nothing more than a trap. This was what the game wanted. It wanted us to enter, to cross that threshold and become a part of whatever waited on the other side. But I couldn't let Alex go like this. Couldn't let the game win. The temperature in the room had dropped to an unbearable chill, my breath coming out in visible puffs. The shadows around me twisted, moving like liquid, as if they had a life of their own. The walls seemed to close in, pushing me toward the rift, forcing me to face the reality of the situation. We had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. I staggered back, away from the board, away from the portal, my thoughts racing. How had we gotten here? How had this game, this simple object, transformed into something so monstrous? I couldn't think straight. Panic was setting in, clouding my thoughts. But through the haze of fear, I remembered something. The message I had received earlier, the one from the unknown number. Don't let him reach the end. The words repeated in my mind, and for the first time I understood what they meant. The game wasn't just a series of moves, it was a journey, path. And if Alex reached the end, whatever lay beyond that final step would claim him completely. It would consume him, and I wasn't sure if I could save him after that. I had to stop him before that happened. I had to stop the game, and I had to stop Alex from making that last, fateful move. I turned back to Alex, my feet moving almost of their own accord. His body was convulsing now, his hands gripping the edges of the table so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. He wasn't speaking anymore, only breathing in short, shallow gasps, his chest rising and falling erratically. The game had taken complete control of him, and there was nothing left of the friend I once knew. The symbols on the cards had begun to shift again, glowing brighter, faster. The pieces were moving once more, as if some unseen hand was guiding them. The board itself seemed to hum with energy, and I could feel the presence of something dark, something far beyond our understanding, slowly creeping closer. "Alex!" I shouted, grabbing him by the shoulders. His eyes flickered, his pupils widening, but there was no recognition in his gaze. He didn't see me. He didn't see anything except the game. I shook him harder, desperate. "Alex, you have to listen to me. The game. It's not just a game. It's real. It's controlling you. Please, you have to fight it." For a brief moment, his eyes flickered with something, some shred of recognition. His mouth opened, but all that came out was a low, guttural growl. He was slipping away, fading into whatever was taking over him. I could feel it in his touch, cold and unnatural. His body was no longer his own. The rift in the air continued to swirl, growing larger. I could hear faint whispers coming from it now, too distant to make out, but unmistakably there. It was calling to him. It wanted him just as it had wanted the others before us. And then, something shifted. The game shifted. A single card flew off the board, hovering midair for a moment before falling to the floor with a soft thud. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. It was the final card, the one I hadn't seen before, the one that held the last rule, the last step in the game. I had no doubt that whatever happened after that card was played, it would be the end for both of us. I reached down slowly, my hand trembling, as if the card might burn me. But it didn't. It was cold, colder than anything I had ever felt before. I could feel the weight of it in my hand, the power it held, and the terrible knowledge that once it was placed on the board, everything would change. I couldn't let Alex play it. I couldn't let the game have control anymore. But as my fingers hovered above the card, I realized that there was no other choice. I had to destroy it. If I didn't, the game would consume us both. I snapped my hand away, but before I could act, I heard it. The voice. The same voice from earlier, the one that had whispered through the walls, the one that had spoken in the shadows. It was louder now, more insistent. "You cannot stop the game. I froze, my body locking in place as the voice reverberated in my mind, echoing through the very fabric of reality. It wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a presence. A force that reached beyond the physical world, beyond space and time. The portal was opening wider now, its darkness swallowing everything in its path. I had one chance to stop this. I stood there, frozen, holding the card in my trembling hand. The darkness swirling around the rift seemed to deepen, drawing everything into its gravitational pull. The voice echoed louder, relentless in its insistence, but it wasn't the only thing I could hear now. The whispers were growing louder and more frantic. They were coming from all directions, spiraling into a crescendo that made my ears ring. The game had turned from something innocent, something we had laughed over, into something monstrous. The room, once familiar, had become an alien space, a twisted reflection of reality. The air was thick, oppressive, as though something invisible was squeezing the life out of it. I looked at Alex, who was still convulsing in his chair, his face contorted in pain. His body was no longer his own. He was a puppet, jerked around by some force far beyond our understanding. He was slipping, disappearing, and all I could do was watch. This wasn't just about saving him anymore. It was about saving myself, too. The whispers had turned into a chant, the words unintelligible but full of menace. They seemed to come from the game itself, from the cards, from the pieces that moved on their own. It was as if the game had a life of its own, and it was pushing us, urging us to play, to finish, to step through the portal that had opened in the air. You cannot stop the game. The voice was right. I had tried everything, shouting, shaking Alex, even trying to destroy the cards, but nothing had worked. Every attempt to break free had only dragged me deeper into the web of the game's influence. It was as if we were caught in a loop, and every time I tried to break it, the game found a way to pull me back. I looked at the card in my hand again, the final piece, the last step, the end. I knew it would finish the game, but I also knew that once I placed it on the board, everything would change. There would be no going back. It would either trap us in this nightmare forever or send us to a place from which there was no escape. No, the thought rang in my mind. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let the game win. But what choice did I have? Alex was already lost. His body was no longer responding to my pleas. The rift behind him was widening, the dark energy spilling out like liquid, consuming the room in a blanket of shadows. And the whispers, those damn whispers, continued to grow louder, more insistent, like 1,000 voices speaking in unison, urging me to place the card. "Alex," I shouted, stepping toward him. "Fight it. Please, fight it." His body jerked again, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. A brief moment of clarity, like he was coming back. I rushed to his side, desperate to hold onto that sliver of hope. But then, the look in his eyes changed. It wasn't Alex anymore. There was something else behind those eyes. Something ancient. Something that had been awakened by the game. "It's too late." His voice wasn't his own. It was deeper, older, the voice of something ancient. Chilled me to the bone. The words weren't meant for me. They were meant for the game. For whatever force had controlled Alex all this time. I stumbled backward, the card still clutched in my hand. The rift behind Alex had opened fully now, and a cold wind began to pour through it, pushing everything toward the abyss. The game was reaching its climax. The final step. I had no more time to think. No more time to question. The darkness was swallowing the room whole. My only choice was to act, and to act fast. With one last, desperate breath, I shoved the card toward the board. I slammed it down, hoping, praying that something, anything, would happen. For a split second, there was nothing. Silence. And then a blinding flash of light. The world seemed to fracture, the air thickening, twisting. The ground beneath me cracked, and the walls of the room dissolved into nothingness. Everything I had known, everything I had held onto, began to disappear, replaced by the vast, endless dark of the portal. It was as if time itself had ceased to exist. I reached out, grabbing onto anything I could, clutching the remnants of the room that were falling apart around me. But it was futile. The game had won. I had played into its hands just like Alex had. The darkness swallowed us whole, and in that final, all-consuming moment, I realized the truth. The game didn't just take players. Took everything. Took your past, your memories, your very existence, and turned it into part of the endless void that existed beyond the game. And as the last of the light flickered and died, I felt myself pulled into the abyss, no longer a player, but part of the game's eternal, unyielding grasp. Everything was silent. The blinding light that had consumed the room slowly faded into an all-encompassing darkness. My mind was a haze, my senses numb, as though I were no longer connected to the physical world. There was no floor beneath me, no walls surrounding me. Just an endless, oppressive void that stretched into infinity. I couldn't move. I couldn't think clearly. The only thing I could feel was the weight of despair, the suffocating sensation of being utterly lost, of having no direction, no hope. The whispers were gone. The chanting, the voices that had filled the room during the game, were now replaced by a cold, eerie silence. And yet, in the depths of that silence, there was a faint echo, a subtle vibration, like the remnants of something large and powerful still lingering in the air. The game was still here, I realized, even though the world had seemingly vanished. I didn't know how long I drifted in that empty darkness. Time had no meaning here. It was as though I had fallen out of it entirely, suspended in a moment that could stretch on forever, or had already been stretching for eternity. There were no stars in the void, no distant horizons, no sense of space. Just an endless, oppressive blackness. But then, something stirred. I heard the faintest rustling sound, like paper or thin cardboard moving in the wind. And then, before I could react, something materialized in front of me. A familiar shape, a form that seemed to slowly take shape from the darkness itself. It was the board. The game board. It hovered in front of me, its pieces still scattered across the surface, glowing faintly with an eerie light. The cards, the pieces, the symbols, they were all there, just as they had been in that room. It was as if the game had never truly ended, as if it had simply waited for me to return, to continue. The rift, the portal, it was still open. And then I saw him, Alex, or what was left of him. His body was no longer whole. His eyes were wide open, yet they were blank, devoid of any recognition, any emotion. His face was pale, frozen in that same unnatural expression I had seen when the game first took hold of him. He was still here, trapped in the game, just like me. I wanted to scream, to run, to break free from the nightmare that had become my reality. But I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything except watch as the game, the very thing that had taken everything from me, continued to play on. "You are one of us now," a voice echoed. The same voice that had spoken to us from the shadows. The same voice that had promised there would be no escape. "There is no end, no freedom. You are part of the game, and the game has no end." I couldn't respond. My mind was fogged, my thoughts too scattered to form words. I had thought that by placing the final card, I could stop it. I had thought that by ending the game, I could save Alex, save myself. But there was no end to it. The game didn't have a final move. It was eternal, a cycle that repeated itself, drawing in new players to replace those who had already been consumed. We were trapped. I reached out for the board, my hand shaking as I tried to touch the pieces, but the moment my fingers brushed against them, the game pulled away, as though it had no intention of allowing me to finish what I had started. "You cannot leave," the voice continued. "There is no escape from the game. You belong to it now, and it belongs to you." The words lingered in my mind, wrapping themselves around me like a cage, suffocating every last shred of hope I had left. There was no escape. There was no way out. I had become part of the game just like Alex had. And now we would both play forever, whether we wanted to or not. I thought back to the first moment we had picked up that game, to the first time we had sat down and started playing. It had seemed so innocent, so harmless. But now I understood. The game had never been innocent. It had been waiting, drawing us in, pulling us into its world where there were no rules, no boundaries, no mercy. And now we were just 2 more pieces on the board, caught in an endless loop, waiting for the next player to take their turn, to join us in this eternal nightmare. The void closed in around me again, and the game began anew.